So I wanted to make sure I gave you that update because that's an important local bill that we've been tracking.
Do any of
And
us
just
need
as
to
a
reach out?
reminder-
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask if any of us need to reach out to him. You can let us know, please.
No, I think it's moving. I mean, the process is that once it was in committee, it had to get, all of the bill sponsors in the House had to reach out to the Senate Rules Committee, to Rules Chairman to, encourage him to assign it to a committee, which they did, and now it's assigned, and so we just wait for it to be scheduled.
Thank you.
And the context for that one, if you need further context, is that the chief of police for Apex felt, and we agreed with them, that the students have a relationship with the SRO from the school, and so he wanted to have that same SRO be with the student body at grade level. And of course, it's in a different jurisdiction. So there actually be 2 SROs at that school next year, but they needed to deal with the jurisdictional issue. But that's the reason it's in the best interest of students.
So I wanted to make sure I gave you that update. And so it's been assigned to committee, but the committee is not scheduled to bill yet. So I'll, of course, keep you up to speed on that. Now, to Senate Bill 599, excellent educators in every classroom. This is a bill that deals with teacher licensure, and Dr. Holland will go into detail on that. But it is, but this bill has originated in the Senate. It was not subject to crossover because it did have a finance component to it. So it started off in the Education Committee, which it passed overwhelmingly from that committee. It was heard first, and some questions, but it was literally passed overwhelmingly from the committee. Assigned to, then its serial referral was to Finance, and it's scheduled to be heard in Senate Finance tomorrow at 1 p.m. But with that, I wanted to really call it to your attention because of the significance of the bill, and of course, Dr. Holland will walk us through that in detail because she is the expert, which we appreciate. Dr. Holland.
Just a real quick overview. It essentially replaces the current legislation around teacher licensure and teacher preparation. It creates what Senator Barefoot refers to as an educator preparation program, or an EPP. And it most significantly changes the rules around alternative entry into the profession. We refer to alternative entry most often as lateral entry. We hire lateral entry or alternative entry teachers for our classrooms based on typically content-specific programming. So you would hire someone with a math degree to teach math, and they would complete program requirements while they're also teaching, so it runs in tandem. And currently they have up to 3 years to do that. They have 2 different ways they can do it. They can go to a college or university that has a preparation program for them. A lot of them refer to it as NC Teach, or they can go through a route through what's called a regional alternative licensing center. And the RELC provides a plan of study for them. And then they can go, when they get a plan of study, to a community college, or they can complete professional development with their employer to meet the competencies. This completely eliminates the RELC as an option for them. It allows what's called an EPP to apply for a program. It can be public or private. And any of the candidates for an alternative license or a traditional license would have to be approved and go through an EPP. Our assumption is that the traditional colleges and universities will apply to be an EPP, and they'll go to this new commission that's being established for review. The alternative programs will be what we'll have to watch, and that will be interesting. A couple of concerns around that is the GPA requirement. Currently, individuals can be employed with a 2.5 cumulative GPA. The EPP requirement is a 2.7. And it doesn't seem like a big difference, but for some of our folks that are second career people, it's significant. Some very positives. This does restore mentor funding, and I just looked over at Ms. Kimsey, and we spend a little over $500,000 from mentor stipends every year. So that could be funding that we get if it's approved as part of the budget. There's a specific pathway for teacher assistants in this program. And there's also a 2-year phase out, which was a relief for us. The original version of the bill just cut it off completely. This one allows a 2-year phase out for lateral entry teachers, so we have an opportunity to review it and plan and advertise changes. The commission will be made up of superintendents, school district personnel, principals, who will review and approve EPPs for the state board. Other concerns other than the GPA, they are reducing it from a 3-year window to a 2-year window. We're hoping that the guidelines for the EPPs will mitigate that though, and that their requirements will not be allowed to exceed what's reasonable for someone to complete in 2 years. And then it seems to add an additional pedagogy assessment or a test for candidates. So we have questions about that around preparation for the test and the cost to the candidates to complete them. We've done some analysis on testing. Depending on what someone's getting licensed in, it could be $150. For some, it could be $750. And this would be an additional cost on top of that for our beginning educators. There are a lot of questions around this that we're still waiting just to see what happens. It requires at least a field experience in a low-performing school. It requires a 16-week internship as opposed to now, for traditional teachers, they have a 10 to 12-week. And it recommends they have an opportunity at the beginning of the year and end of the year. But there's no clarification in the middle of what happens to see how teachers move students if they're doing an internship from the beginning to the end. It just recommends they have an opening of school experience and a closing of school experience. So just the logistics around that are a question. It references sanctions for the EPPs if their students are not performing, and we don't know what happens to someone who earns a license from a sanctioned EPP. There's no clarity on that. Currently, there are 2 approved alternative licensing programs already operating in the state. One is Guilford. Guilford's ACT program. One is through the Central Carolina RESA. That's starting up this fall, and there's no mention of how those 2 programs might be impacted by this legislation going forward. High-level summary for you.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Holland for digging into the details of a very complex piece of legislation. Courtney wanted to make sure that there was good information for the board about it, and I have some knowledge, but I'm really glad that we have expertise on board that could really dig into the details and provide a good summary. I think Dr. Holland covered it well in terms of pros and some cons with it. In terms of some of the last couple of points about requiring field experience in a low-performing school for a teacher to go and get a license, I mean, that's a concern if that's a requirement, and that you would need to, in order to get an alternative license to actually do that, could have a preclusive effect on being able to get a license. And so that's a worry, and I think that's a good question raised, as well as one of the comments about that requires an internship that would involve both the opening and closing of schools, a 16-week internship. If that also is sort of a requirement to get a license, again, that could create a bar that would be a difficult hurdle. So I think those are fair questions. Hopefully they can be worked out since it's not in its final form necessarily yet. So I think it's great that you've raised those questions, and Courtney has that information and can raise those points and say, well, there may be some good ideas here. Can we refine some of this so that it doesn't create hurdles that we can't jump over for people, that the idea being for there to be easier and better paths to get licensure. So.
Can I just ask for clarification on the GPA? I mean, I am sensitive to the GPA issue, but just like we do for graduate school admission, there's the possibility of sort of grade recovery. Right? If you go back, take a few grad classes, show that you're operating at a higher level than you did as an undergrad, because there's lots of people who sort of choke at an undergrad and then come back. Is there no provision for that? Is that the implication here? Is there any kind of a, if I had a 2.5 GPA 15 years ago, and I've been working in a profession and I'm doing well, that 15 years ago GPA is still going to come back to bite me? Or is there, so there's no grade recovery anywhere in the language?
There does not appear to be right now. in this particular bill. Current operating procedures does allow for that.
Right.
There's a two-tiered column for lateral entry. If they don't have the 2.5, we can consider work experience, and we look it up for a 3.0 in their senior year or in specific content hours and certain tests on the ACT or scores on the SAT or ACT. So we have that flexibility. That is not allowed in this now. I know that some of my colleagues across the state have brought that up, and I didn't include that in my summary, but I'll add it.
Okay.
And again, from a process standpoint, it's in its second stop in the Senate tomorrow. If they're able to get to it, it's a long list of bills that are supposed to be covered in a 50-minute session. So, so there presumably is some time to continue to have this conversation with Senator Barefoot, who is the primary, force behind this bill. And that's just before, as it leaves the Senate, and presumably there's time to continue to have conversations in the House. But always being in touch with the bill sponsor, for this issue, that would be incredibly important.
So I'm assuming this doesn't affect any out-of-state trained teachers that we might recruit. But is it based on another out-of-state model or on a model that is being used in other states to increase teacher training?
Well, from in some comments that were made in committee, there has been some input from superintendents, from other stakeholders. I think the department has had some input into specifics, and other advocates have had input into some of the specifics around this. So that specific question, I can't really speak to like where the beginning of the models come from, but the bill sponsor feels like he has had significant input from stakeholders.
Ms. Kusher, presumably, it also rewrites the license, what we call the licenses.
Okay.
So an out-of-state trained teacher with an out-of-state license would come in and be able to apply for our North Carolina license. It wouldn't affect that part of it. They have a residency license, which we call it an initial license or beginning teacher license. He's retitled it a residency license. So that will not change the out-of-state program application. Mr. Soto?
Any sense on where this bill, along discussing those lines, where does this bill originate? Any sense where this bill originated, where it came from?
Let's see. Well, there's been a couple different made in committee, and where the bill sponsor and Doug Merrill can jump in here if you have any insight on this. But I know that there's been some, again, feeling as though he's had input from stakeholders, and this is a conversation that that may have started even before, obviously started before this session. But I'm not exactly sure if that answers your question. Are you asking if it was a model legislation from some other?
I got it.
Thank you.
Well, you're on that same topic. My question is this a bill in search of a problem? Or was there
Dr.
something
Merrill-
that we're
Dr.
going to
Merrill's
try
got
to
it.
solve?
Dr. Merrill's got it.
Well,
Kill him.
over a year ago, we being the urban group, proposed to Senator Barefoot an alternative way to license people that had more flexibility than the traditional higher ed path. And it was being modeled off Guilford's process, which is a lot of residency time, credit for hours spent while working in the system, things of that nature. Rigorous, but Guilford had been able to pay for it through grants for 6 or 7 years. So we were cloning that as a regional approach. It was added into the budget or one of the bills last year. Some money was put aside for startup. It was open statewide for a grant request, if you will. Our RESA is the only one that submitted a request to try and develop this. So 15 of our RESA districts have signed on to this model, which is being designed this coming year. That's the only connection I can see to this 23-page bill that emerged. But there was never any discussion between us and Senator Barefoot to this iteration. We were simply trying to get another way to increase our pipeline beyond traditional routes. And Marcy made quick reference to the RISA model, which is in design right now. We think it can survive these guidelines, but we're not quite sure. And this is a 23-page bill, so there's a lot going on in here. That's the closest I can come to where I read it as the senator's effort to create additional opportunity for teachers. But there's a lot of hooks in here, you know, so.
About how he described it.
Okay.
So you all recall, I asked this question yesterday about what our human resources look like, because there's been a lot of conversation behind closed doors that he is answering the problem of the teacher pipeline. And so that's why I asked about our own human resource talent pool yesterday. But that's the conversation that's been had. So, but I'm like you, there's lots of hooks here.
Yeah, personnel administrators in North Carolina, PANC, which you remember, in fact, emerging president.
President-elect.
Okay. Have you not taken a position with input that you're going to be getting over to the Senate and everyone else?
We have, yes, sir.
Okay, is that written and been submitted yet?
We have as individuals, individual groups, because we're regionalized. So the regions have put together information and have submitted it. As I understand, in one of the committees, he referenced that and highlighted the issue around the GPA, which everybody pretty much quickly targeted because we know that that's going to be an issue for recruitment. And he was unwilling in some of the committee discussion that I listened to on that. So we are continuing to have conversations regionally, and I know that we are now moving to our House representatives who will hear this soon to make sure they're fully informed before it gets to them.
So a follow-up, so that, so in the comments, I'm not gonna make an assumption, so I'm asking, are you all also not just addressing the pros and cons that you just listed here? So I'm thinking strategically around, and again, it's less of Wake County's problem from what I understand yesterday. The majority of our workforce are all came from School of Education. So it's a little bit different for us. I'm curious if other folks who've given their comments are really talking about the need for what they can already see, right? So they can actually look at their own data pool and see. So before we moved here, we lived in a rural community. They had a lot of lateral entry teachers in that community. And so I'm curious if people are saying, look at our data based on, we brought in these lateral entry folks under these old guidelines. So I'm curious if people have brought that to his attention. Because for Wake, that's a very different conversation as I understand it.
It is, and I don't have any of that information.
Not entirely, because part of our presentation over a year ago was our vacancy rate when we open schools and the number of subs that we have to hire, because even the urbans supposedly with their supplements still can't fill all vacancies.
Oh, I agree, but when I
So-
asked the question yesterday, it was clear, what I heard is, oh, that's not really our issue.
Okay.
So that's why I'm asking
Got it.
specifically, because I do know for sure it's an issue in rural communities. I would recommend that would be a great piece of feedback for folks to provide. Thank you. Any
The
other
title
thoughts?
speaks of accountability, and those accountability metrics are often, there's a lot of devils in the details. Is there gonna be something like EVOS accountability? If you haven't made some standard, then your licensure doesn't stick? What are they, God, please no, but whenever I see that kind of accountability measure for a program like this, I'm always worried because I don't usually see that the people who write this understand much of educational accountability. And it's no offense to any one individual, it's just,
They speak to the reports that the EPPs will have to provide that mirror what now the state board reviews, what it's called an IHE report card. And they look at program completers, they look at successful completion of tests, either the Pearson for elementary and special ed teachers or the Praxis 2 for other areas. So they'll have data points that they'll have, but they've established as part of this a commission that's going to set up what those are gonna be. So that's not detailed fully and fleshed out in the legislation, because my assumption, and this is my assumption, is it'll be at the hands of the commission to decide what data points will be in those reviews for the EPPs.
And will this be metrics pre-licensure, or will it also be post-licensure? We don't know yet.
The current IHE report card, they do request data from us as a district for their graduates 5 years out, but it's difficult for them to track them over time by district unless we're able to, because that's not a data point that we collect at hiring necessarily. So there's a lot of survey data that they send out, and tracking them by email and location can be difficult.
It's possible that you're asking about an individual teacher and the progress and in terms of getting a licensure and the testing requirements and how well they have to do on EVOS. And you may have been referring to the assessment of the entity. Yeah,
Well, both can be an issue.
right, gotcha.
What I'm looking for is that we don't have metrics. It's classic teach the test, right? We will get what we measure. And so if we have kind of sterile metrics, we're not necessarily going to get the creativity that we need for today's classrooms. That's my level of concern.
Yeah, I haven't read the whole bill, but if you go halfway through, about 13 or 14, the accountability really is on the EPP.
Yeah.
Right, like their real focus here is the program doing what it's doing. To your point, the metrics around the outcomes of the person who goes through their program.
But as Dr. Holland said, there appears to be an additional test of the teacher added into this for, and that's, obviously you have to pass the test. So that's.
Which is the metrics for the EPP based on this language, not the first one.
I'm sorry, thank you. Thank you, Dr.
So, more to come.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Sure,
I mean, I don't,
Just one more thing I want to add.
just the budget process and sort of where that schedule is, and sort of what we've heard. Conferees appointed. Now, of course, Senate and House have both passed their budgets, so they have to appoint the conferees to sort of negotiate the details and get to the final form. Some discussion that about leadership being really committed to having the budget done by fiscal year. So that means having a budget complete, negotiations completed week of the 20th. So it can be sent to the governor. Governor, while they're in session, has 10 days to act on the bill. So want to make sure that that there'd be enough time for the governor to have full review and to do what he may need to do on the budget. But just from a schedule standpoint, just know that the conference process is getting underway, and so our task now is to raise concerns to those budget full chairs that are actively negotiating every day, so that we can have our concerns considered. But it's going quickly. So that's from a scheduling standpoint. We just obviously we'll stay engaged there, but wanted to make sure that you were aware of where that was also.
Thank you. Stay tuned for
Stay tuned.
today's six.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for everybody.
Mr. Winter, do you have, oh, yeah, I couldn't see past over there. We've heard a little bit about the process, now down to our update.
Yeah, so while the PowerPoint's coming up, we've got a couple of things to share with you today. First, a comparison of the Senate and House budget and potential impact that will have on our budget, our local budget. And then we also want to go over the potential risk that we face as a school system. Not only that was in your budget, but additional risks that we're seeing today. So, one note is on June 19th, the county commissioners should vote on their budget. And provide us with additional information. Our plan on June 20th would be to bring you an interim budget resolution, because of course we will not know the final results of the state budget and be able to do the balancing within that time period. So we're going to have some screens here, and I'm not going to go through everything. You have all the information. You should have received the information in assembly. But I do want to point out some things as we go through this PowerPoint. So you'll see we're starting off with salaries, teacher salaries. The Senate 0 to 8.5% increases, the House 0.6 to 6.9. The Senate increased everywhere except 25 years. The House increases up to, I believe, 27. So the House has a starting teacher increase from 35,000 to 35,300. The Senate is putting in highly qualified teaching graduates, where a teacher with a GPA of 3.75 and a score of 48 or higher on the Ed TPA. If they go to a low performing school, they will start on the AO4 step. If STEM, AO3, and then AO2 for all others. So you're rewarded with a GPA and a score for a starting salary. The House has put in a piece where you will get a retention bonus up to $5,000 with 27 years plus if you agree to teach 2 additional years. So there's a touch at the tail end of the teacher scale for the House. For school counselors, the House has put in a plan where they would pay the school counselors according to the school psychologist schedule. Personnel would receive a 6-year jump in years of experience. So the difficult piece is really the assistant principals and principals. So this is currently how we're paying assistant principals. It's basically based on total years of experience as an educator degree level. They do receive longevity, and they have the advanced degree and doctorate. So if we look at the 2 differences, so the Senate is linking to Schedule A plus 13%. They would lose longevity. They will still receive advanced and doctorate supplements. They lose any ABC bonus that's built into their salary currently, and they would be held harmless. The House size, the A schedule plus 22%, they would include longevity, doctorate, and a hold harmless. For principals, the schedules are built on years of experience, size of school, ABC bonuses, they receive longevity, and the advanced degrees. Both the Senate and the House eliminate the current principal schedules. The Senate implements the schedule with ranges based on ADM, and they receive bonuses for student growth. They would lose longevity, they would lose advanced degree. There is a hold or harmless clause, and this is going to be funded from lottery receipts. Whereas the House, based on years experience and additional pay based on the ADM again, and then also on the number of students eligible for free and reduced lunch. Once again, they also no longer receive longevity, advanced and doctorate degrees. So it's quite a change from the principal schedule.
And for clarification, we have no advanced degree requirement for principals, is that correct?
Correct. As long as they're certified. That's master level.
They deny it.
So certification would be equivalent to a master's degree?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So they have to have an MSA.
Yeah, I mean, yes, to be certified.
Okay.
For non-certified and central office, Senate's 1.5% increase or $750, whichever is higher. OTs and PTs, they have a new proposal for their schedule. In the House, it's a flat $1,000 salary increase for all non-certified and central service, and then an additional $1,000 in the second year. However, in lieu of the $1,000 increase, the House has put in an additional $16.9 million to touch on bus driver salaries. look at us, that's 10%, so we would get 1.6 million. And the following year, it would be another 16.9 on top of this. So there's additional salaries in there, working on the bus driver pay. Teacher bonus programs, much of it's the same. The differences, they are now including charter schools. Charter schools were not included in this past year. They're now including charter schools. They removed licensed teachers. They removed the requirement to still be teaching the course, such as advanced courses in CTE. The House adds a Cambridge AICE and increases the maximum per teacher to 3,500. The Senate says the teacher must remain in the same school. It previously said LEA. Third grade bonuses, similar changes, removes the requirement to still be teaching third grade. One interesting piece is that the retroactive pay. So it will go back and pay charter schools for 2015-16 exam results. It's third grade bonuses. And then any teacher that was excluded in the LEA because they did not meet requirements but met the exam requirements will now be able to receive pay retroactive to 2015-16. So I think that's the first time we have gone back and used a current year money to pay a prior year payment to a teacher.
And that's both Senate and House budget.
Yes, it is. Benefits, benefit increases, retirement, Senate 16.69, 17.21 in the House for retirement. They have the same health insurance. You'll see the additional cost impact our local from the Senate side is $351 for retirement, $351,000, $58,000 for health. And you see the larger requirement on the House side for additional costs of $1.5 million for the retirement increase.
What you're saying is that's the additional cost beyond the budget we built.
Yes, it is. It is, because we placed increases in our budget.
We just weren't high enough.
Right. So we have a special annual leave bonus. We've had this in previous years. This one is new and a little bit different, whereas they will give 5 days to employees. The 5 days can be carried into future years. The 5 days have no cash value. So if an employee leaves the system, they will not be paid out this vacation and it cannot go toward retirement. So it's 5 days to use, but you must use it in your term of employment, which is a little unique. We've had something similar in past years, but they did not carry over into the next year. This will carry forward.
So term of employment is not related to a contract period.
No, term of employment with the school system. So if
And
you're
it's-
here
and
10 more years, you have 10
Which is
years
why
to use
it's-
those
And
5
it's not
days.
within your 10 months of service.
No, it has been in the past. It's not now. This can carry forward into another year.
But not be converted to cash.
Right. You cannot be paid out. It will not go to retirement.
Has to be used.
Right.
So we were talking about this at the UNC System Faculty Assembly. This creates at least a third type of bonus leave, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Which adds administrative headache, if not cost.
Yes, sir. Central office reductions. The Senate has a 10.5% or $10 million reduction in 17-18 with an additional 5 on top of that in 18-19. The cost for 17-18 is roughly $1 million. The House has a 5% or $5 million reduction, which increases to $10 million in 2018-19. You see the impact, $500,000 in 17-18.
And that's in addition to the 1 million we have on our deferred list
For
for central office
Have a freeze.
jobs.
the 90-day freeze,
Right.
yes, that would be.
So this is an addition. than
Yes, ma'am.
what's already on it.
Textbook, the Senate has they're replacing the non-recurring with recurring 10 million and adding 1.1 non-recurring. House continues at 10.4 non-recurring, and the impact is different than our budget document, as Dr. Merrill mentioned earlier. Correct. Children with disabilities and academically gifted. Increase in dollar amount per student, and the House increased the cap from 12.5 to 13%. Just quick math is would be an increase in state funds of $3.3 million. And also in the math, and these numbers of course change with students, but we're right at 13% right now, so it would affect us. And then academically gifted stays at the 4%. We do have a slight increase in dollars. Cooperative Innovative High Schools. So the Senate, in the second bullet you'll see, they're providing a 25% reduction for these schools. And we have 4, is that correct, that receive these funds right now? So there's 4 schools that receive these funds. So there'll be a 25% reduction this year and a 50% reduction in future years. The impact on Wake County Public Schools for this coming year is $237,000. The House is allotting $200,000 for each of these schools. In doing so, that means one of our schools, I believe Vernon Malone, who does not receive money currently, will receive $200,000. So that decreases the impact, if we so choose, to distribute the money in that manner to $66,000 from the House side. We have lost, through the Senate, lost flexibility of transferring funds to children with disabilities, academically and intellectually gifted, LEP, textbooks. Then you see the classroom teacher allotment, 6 through 12, may be transferred and converted at A00. No transfer allowable for K5. And that shifts the cost of $4.8 million from the state to local, because that's one of the categories that we use the flexibility currently to gain funds.
This is really restrictions on budget flexibility.
It is.
Okay.
It is. Lack of budget flexibility. Driver safety incentive program, the House has not changed, so we would treat driver's ed in a similar manner. The Senate, and this again goes to much more administrative work, the Senate will do a fee reimbursement program. The student must be 15, less than 18, and to be eligible must obtain a learner's permit on first attempt. At that time, they can request a reimbursement from Department of Public Instruction. So we will have to create a revenue budget, accept revenue for the funds for driver's ed, pay our contractor, Jordan Driving School at this time, and then the individual will ask the state for a refund. And, okay,
The state funding that we get to support the program is what? $100 a student, 100, any?
no, well, this year, next year, with this plan, no, we won't be receiving state funds. We'll be receiving it from the
There
individual.
won't be any
tax
state
department.
funds.
Right.
We can charge up to
275.
275, we collect it.
No, we can charge up to our cost. They can only ask for a reimbursement for $275. So we're allowed to charge the cost of.
Okay, and our cost is,
262.
okay, all right,
So we're somewhere in that range. Yes, sir.
okay. Then the student's responsible for making the application to DPI to
And-
refund their stipend.
And they
So-
only
But
get it if
only if
they
they
are
pass.
successful on their first attempt.
That's right.
Of getting their
So if they fail their learner's permit, they.
No reimbursement.
No reimbursement.
Public will like that one.
We currently have a budget of $3 million from the state, so that would go away.
So what mechanism is there for collecting $275 from folks who aren't students, aren't enrolled in our schools, and tracking all that and knowing which John Smith sent us a check, and how does all that work? That's why we got you.
We're working on that.
I bet the state.
Goodness gracious.
We're not at that point. So back to the question on additional administrative costs, this one's much larger than other administrative costs. Yes.
Wow.
Well, what does this
That
do to the
won't
family?
cost anything.
What does this do to the family that doesn't have $275 of disposable income to?
That's a
Their,
big issue.
their child,
Right, it's a
their
barrier
child
you
doesn't
can't
drive.
get over.
Child doesn't get a permit.
Or a risk, you know, of not passing.
That's what
not
the
getting
state's
that.
saying.
Different purpose here.
Again, has this been a method that works in another state? I don't. Who knows?
Yeah, we've not seen this. You know, there was discussion at one time, a couple of years ago, about whether we just go to the point of, if we got out of the business. And we talked about that in the budget session in the past couple of years, is whether when they were threatening to not fund us, whether we would just be student directly. But we're still gonna be responsible for buying software, we're still responsible for buying cars through the revenue we bring in. That's why the number's higher than the actual class and drive time. It's just a lot of variables that are gonna be built into this.
And there'll be a legal issue about whether the district needs to make,
Speak up.
adjustment. There'll be a legal issue about whether the district needs to make adjustments for families that can't afford it.
Absolutely.
Do we have to waive the fees and so on and so forth? In general, fees that are charged that are academic in nature, we do have to make adjustments. This question would be whether that would apply to this.
So extended learning and integrated.
So I know the community colleges are breathing a sigh of relief.
Well, that's true.
They were the
That
ones
was
who-
another option.
Yeah, they were the ones who were gonna have to do this.
But we will not have to do this, private contractor, I mean, we can contract to the private contractor like Jordan Driving School, but could they run independent of us? It has to run through LEAs.
You know, right now, we don't fully know that answer, but because there's more to it than just driving and teaching the class, because of the vehicles and all the other pieces, we're thinking it's gonna have to run through the LEA.
Well, we still have to report grades.
But that's still a good question,
Performance.
though, I hear you, we don't know the answer, but for charters and privates who take with us, they could just contract directly to Georgia School. I mean,
Right.
we don't know, but that's an option, because currently they take it with us.
So
So
currently,
that'll be
we're
interesting to
required to
see.
provide it for them.
Right, that's my point,
Right.
but now we don't know that,
Right.
now that they ask for the reimbursement directly, is what Mark is saying.
Right.
We don't know the answer. Interesting.
So at-risk student services, extended learning and integrated student supports competitive grant program. So actually, Terry, if you want to talk about this, she checked in with DPI today if this meant anything to our budget, so I'll let you.
Yeah, the language says that of the money appropriated for at-risk student services, DPI is going to use $6 million for extended learning competitive grant program. So we asked if that would impact our allotment. They said that it's minimal. In total, it'd be a $36,000 decrease to us. It's happening more at the state level with the dollars not coming out of school district budgets. And the same with the Life-Changing Experiences School Pilot Program. They're using money they had set aside for at-risk, $360,000, to contract with Children and Parent Resource Group to design and implement a 2-year Life-Changing Experiences School Pilot Program. But it's minimal, $36,000 total decrease to our allotment.
So in the Senate, and we've talked about this before, they have the proposal that school boards can't sue counties. And we've discussed this in the past. It was not in the House, but it was in the Senate. It sort of restricts your options once a budget is given to you. So Terry put this together. You know, this isn't a final number, but this gives you some idea of some of the potential costs. The biggest piece up top is the salaries, and we've looked at teacher salary, we looked at non-certified central office salaries. What we can't project are assistant principals and principal salaries on a quick basis, because you've heard how those are going to be structured, and each of those are almost handled manually. So we can't come up with a projection. What we have seen is based on what we put in our budget at a 3% increase for local cost of salaries compared to teachers, non-certified, and central office. The number's very similar. So we don't see a big hit based on what the state has put out there now, but that's with the exception, not including principal and assistant principal salaries. So we really didn't want to put a number up there yet, because there is going to be some kind of effect on the salaries. But you see the Senate impact, so the adjusted retirement rate, the hospitalization, the flexibility, and central office reduction. And because we don't have salaries, we didn't put a total number up there, but those numbers on that screen are roughly $6.2 million additional cost to the local budget right now. And we didn't include the bottom two. And those are decisions. That's where the state is not funding the cooperative high schools. And we took the funding out on the state side, but we have not put it in on the local side. I mean, that's going to be a decision that's going to have to be made. This is more of we're trying to give you a true number. In a minute, we'll look at potential risk where the number's a little bit different. On the House side, you see the adjustment, same thing with salaries. You see the adjustment to the retirement rate and the hospital rate and the central office reduction. But with the cap going from 12.5% to 13%, we will save money locally with that cap, potentially save money there, which totals this column to be about a $1.1 million on the savings side. That's without salary, so don't let me lead you to believe we're really saving money here. But it's a lower cost prior to salaries. And again, all this is, you'll see the star, the asterisk, additional costs require additional local dollars. So that sort of gives you where we are with the House and Senate. The other piece that we put in the budget book is the potential risk that we face when we create our budget. And so we're going to show you these risks, and then highlighted in yellow are additional items down at the bottom. So Affordable Care Act, we really don't have a dollar value for that right now, because we're managing the Affordable Care Act without having to pay out any funds at the moment. I mean, that's part of the reason why we hire principals at a certain rate instead of full-time when we bring back retirees. So we're managing that through HR and payroll, so we don't have a real cost. The charter schools, the next line, that's an unknown for us too at the moment, because we're guessing at what the real charter number is going to be. If we actually took all the charter schools increases along with the, I believe it's 2 new charter schools, the number is higher than what we put in the budget. But we tried to estimate based on what we've seen in the past. So we don't know what the real number may be. It could be a gain or loss in that category. So as of right now, the continuation budget, which we had in our budget book, the continuation budget is being funded basically. It's being funded. So that risk may go away. We should find that out in the next few weeks as to whether the House and Senate remain where they're going to fund the continuation fund. Federal resources are still unknown. Lap salaries, we've talked about this before. We put out 5,800 months of employment, which is a $19 million cost. So we have positions that we have no budget behind. $19.5 million cost. The magnet new and revised theme schools. So we have, this could be, revenue could make us better if we have magnet grant can pay for some of these items that we have in our local budget right now. That's why you see it as a credit on this. Actually, it could be a positive to the local budget. Pay raises we just talked about. Other than assistant principals and principals, we're pretty much at a break-even number. But once we have those numbers, which we do think there'll be a small increase, but we don't know what that number is yet. Pension spiking, we've talked about pension spiking with the board before, where we're being required to pay the difference if not enough money has been collected by the retirement system. It's a very simple explanation of a very complex issue, but we reserved $1.6 million in the financials last year because at the end of June, when we ran a pension spiking report, we showed the potential of owing the retirement system $1.6 million. And the retirement system sends us a report listing names on a monthly basis. So we took that potential cost, and it was $1.6 million. Our last report in May now reads $2.8 million. So we put the difference up there because we do not have that budget anywhere. So we have that potential cost of an additional $1.2 million.
There, a couple months ago, there was an adjustment upward of the variables, which pushed that number up.
Actuarial stuff.
Yes, that's the word.
So this doesn't matter where these people worked in North Carolina. If they retire in Wake County, we're responsible for any difference.
Correct. Right.
Yes, sir.
Kylie?
And it also doesn't matter if there was technically any kind of a spike. There doesn't need to be
Right,
any.
whether there was a spike or
right,
not.
rapid increase in the last years of employment. That's not the case. It's as Mark said, if as eloquently as he could in short order, that if the money paid into the system wasn't enough to cover the retirement liability, then you're looking at a spike if somebody's making over $100,000.
The retirement and hospitalization rates we looked at, the unemployment reserve, we had to pay into a state reserve for unemployment. There's always a risk that that number may go up. We've been employed, and the economy is strong enough now that we're not losing people as we did many years ago during the recession, so we don't see a number there right now, but there's always potential. Class size legal requirement, we have the 1.8 million in the budget this year. There's an additional $24 million that we are going to face in the future, and this is personnel. If we fully staff, this is personnel. We do not have a number yet to share with you for facilities. Of course, that is being worked on currently, but we don't have one to put into this report yet. We will add it when we get there.
Well, the majority of the class size issue was kicked down the road. There still are some implications for this year. Do we have a cost estimate for this year, or?
We can't, because
We
as
don't know
the
what it is,
enrollment
yes.
changes, we've got to plug the holes as we go along on the class size. So it's very hard to say when it'll pop in a different school.
But it will have cost implications.
Yeah, during the year it will. And my only solution for that is a one-time plug for the remainder of the year. Hire a teacher for 6 months and comply with class size. This number 24 is on the assumption that there will be no relief for the enhancement positions, which we're told we should see next spring. But this assumes, what we were facing 5 months ago, the worst case scenario, which is why that's at 24 million.
So those dollars would come from that thing we call a fund balance?
Yeah, it's called that sometimes.
Well, it's recurring funds, it's gonna have to come from someplace other than.
Well,
that.
if it's a
Well,
plug, it's not a
it's-
recurring.
I mean, if it's a hire a teacher to finish the year.
True, true.
So we also discussed earlier the cooperative and innovative high schools. There's the dollar value, the risk, the loss of the flexibility, the 4.8 million. So a couple of things happen with property and liability insurance, and we've received some estimates. So we have a couple of liability cases that could be high-end that we're looking at. Just growth in itself causes your costs to increase. But the biggest number is property. That's probably over 3/4 of that number is going to be an increase in our property insurance. Due to, we had 4 events this year that were fairly major. We've had a really good record over the past 5 to 10 years where we had not had any events, and we received a special discount for going so long without having a major event in Wake County Public Schools. And then we've had, and then we had Matthew, which was a major flood and a major event. We had another event at Burnham Malone due to rain, and we had 2 fires. And so we are losing our discount. And potentially, we may have to buy some additional type insurance to cover us for flood insurance, but we don't know yet. But an estimate, and hopefully on the high end, is $400,000 additional, which was not in the budget. Raising the funding cap for special ed is $3.3 million we discussed, and then of course the central office reductions, $1 million from the Senate and $500,000 from the state. So this is similar. This potential risk has a few more things than we discussed in the state budget. And we know the impact of some of the state budget. These are potential risks above and beyond just the state budget. And Dr. Merrill has requested that we keep this document active and flowing throughout the school year as we see things. So we will continue to do that.
I've got a small table I can share with you later that sort of shows the federal impact of their categories and what is proposed to go up and what's proposed to go down. The whole federal risk is just very hard to predict at this point.
And that's 10% of our budget, 9%.
And then finally, I believe most of you received this, but it was a resolution that the PTA put out in support of the budget. So I think you probably have seen it, but we wanted to include it as we touched on the budget information. So we'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
I have one about the class size that reaches limit during the year. I don't know who needs to answer it. Exactly what is the requirement? I mean, if we've got class size that reaches 20 and a 21st kindergartner comes in, what has to happen to accommodate that student according to the strict cap?
So if the class size goes over 23, any individual class across the district, that class has to submit, there's one of two things. Either we submit a waiver that has to be approved by the board and then sent on to DPI for approval, and there are very narrow reasons under which DPI will approve a waiver request, or the district applies an additional resource in order to bring that class size down. And
Okay.
that's irrespective of whether or not there's space available for it, we figure that out.
And the funding is local,
Yes, it would have to be.
so the funding would have to be local. So in a fast-growing part of the community where schools are already will have to work very thoughtfully about how to bring classes to the 20 max so that there's a room to grow to 23. I mean, there could be multiple times during the year
Right.
when additional personnel would be needed?
All throughout the school year, this will occur. And there are, students do not arrive in multiples of 20
No.
by grade level. So the instances of needing to be creative around multi-level classrooms, including the spaces in which they are located.
You're talking about reorganizing grade levels,
Possibly, yes.
combining grade in the mid-year,
Correct.
Yes.
multiple times?
Yes.
Yes.
So given that we have 100+ elementary schools, do we assume that, just with very rough figuring, half of them are going to run into some issue? Quarter of them are going to run into some issue?
So the issue is that it varies throughout the school year. And there are
Correct.
times of the year where elementary in general will tend to gain students, but
Right.
sometimes you will lose a student as well. So if you've gained a student and you've added an additional resource in November, and then your class size comes back into compliance in January, we've already allocated that additional resource, and I don't think it would make sense to try to go back. So it's just
the
inefficient.
reason I'm trying to go for a little bit of a rough number is because this came up in a discussion with the commissioner last night. And so if we got 100+ elementary schools, if half of them have to deal with an issue that might require a person, we're talking between $2 and $5 million. Is that a reasonable risk, or am I?
You're looking at you're looking at calculating it for about 50 teachers, is what you're saying, during the course of the school year.
Well, another thing we may be dealing with is the necessity to cap certain schools, or to
Oh, yeah.
cap grade levels at
Yeah.
certain schools. So
Or
if there's
bring
not
in
a seat
temporary
available at
grades.
school X, there may be at school Y that's 10 miles away. Or if, I'm particularly concerned about our multi-track schools where you've got a single classroom on a track. Reorganizing those after the year begins
It's just not
would
gonna
be a
work.
nightmare.
But that's what I'm just saying,
As a
conservative, I
Yeah.
think it's like a $2 to $5 million risk.
Well, Terry just indicated as sort of as a touch point that this past school year, 16-17, we allotted about $1.5 million beyond formula for a variety of reasons. So we would anticipate looking at that same source, maybe a little bit more based on
Probably
class
more
size
based-
restrictions moving forward,
Okay.
Just for teacher.
just for teachers.
Right, and that has nothing to do with the physical space for the kids to sit.
Correct.
6 months of 50 teachers is about 1.2. I mean, using an average salary of around 50.
Mhm.
And that may be low, because it's also 6 months after the year. The other thing is, if you're trying to avoid expense, then you reorganize. You know, so
And
there
that's
are
dollar
other
expense,
levers.
but that's not human.
Correct.
Correct.
Probably the best way to
Well, but
show
the
them what we
other,
can do.
how many teachers are going to take a 6-month position? How many teachers will be available to take a 6-month position?
Or we get like stories we heard last night where 3 or 4 subs throughout the year.
Yeah.
For,
Yeah, so there's some challenges to be dealt with.
Ms. Moore,
Yes.
do we have, are we projecting right now, looking at July 1, less than what, 3, they're going to open in 3 or 4 weeks? Any schools that are already looking at classes of 23, opening day being at 23?
Not at this time. We did have all of the schools model how they would use their
Yeah.
resources with directive to keep it below 20 in the average from K to 3. But there are some inefficiencies there where because the K3 class size average, the way the legislation is written, it says K3 class size average of 20. You may have some second or third grade classes that are sitting at 22 or 23, and kindergarten classes sitting at 17, or first grade, you know, so that there's some flux. So depending on where something happens, they may go over, and I actually had one school resubmit their plan today, because they already have had some additional students enroll.
Another question on that is, can any other positions that are allotted, for example, let's say a literacy coach or a literacy intervention, math intervention, those types of support be used as a classroom teacher, as a remedy?
So we have already informed schools, elementary schools, that intervention allotments can be used to support ADM in the classroom. We have also told schools that the academic allotments that they receive, which typically fund specials, and in the past have not been allowed to fund ADM, can be used to support ADM for a teacher classroom position, but that does have an impact on the specials.
And we obviously need interventions, so we're, you know, to say, yes, you can use it was not, depends on the school.
And we need specialists.
And we need specialists, right.
I know the school, the class flexibility can go up to 23, but are we as an LEA supposed to be at 20 across?
Correct. So the district average must not exceed 20 at any time. So what I have told schools is within K3, you must be at 20 or below, because we can't say to one school, you can go above and you have to stay below. That just becomes a little bit of an inexact science. So we've told all of them 20 or below, so in order to maintain the district average.
And I'll come back. It's gone.
Two questions. One, am I correct, did I see somewhere in the House budget that they were reinstituting master's pay for teachers? Or no? And second question, on the principal schedule, the principal pay piece, there's conversation that's sort of going back and forth between ADM versus the number of teachers in the school, which, of course, if I'm correct, that's based on the ADM. But there seems to be some, or belief, I guess, in the House and Senate, there's a little bit of difference. Is one sort of better than the other, the ADM versus the allotments?
One is ADM. Both look at ADM, but the House also looks at the number of students eligible for free or reduced lunch. So it's just different.
Okay. Ms. Moore, back on the class size numbers, we're concentrated on K3, but we're hearing from families big concerns over 4 or 5. Is there a number? There is no cap, correct?
In fourth and
Yes.
correct.
As it is in K3.
Correct.
Do we have a number in our district that would make us uncomfortable and would want to look at providing an additional teacher for relief?
So we are watching that. Because they all submitted plans, we looked at what they were planning
Okay.
for.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't give them a limit, but we talked about, we looked at what schools were already doing. So you have some 4th and 5th grade classes across the district that will at some point during the year reach 30. And so we told them, under no circumstances go above 30. If you have to, then we need to talk about what
Okay.
that looks like and why. So I don't think we've got any higher than that right now unless something has changed since they submitted their plans. But that is higher than they typically do. It wasn't certainly across the board, so.
Right.
I just talked to one principal who's losing 2 5th grade teachers to a non-public Wake County school because they were promised you won't have a big class size like you will once this class size limits. So you can do 4th or 5th grade and we won't get you a big class size. That's already happened.
And you get paid the same amount of money if you have 17 in your classroom or 30.
I don't see any other questions.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would recommend it. There's
Yep.
not time
I know, I
so
just
we
looked,
can-
I was like, it's 5:12.
We can't do capacity changes in 10 minutes.
Such a simple subject.
One thing I
We have 30 minutes break.
Do you want to do it for information at the main meeting?
No.
I want to spend a lot of time on
I don't
this.
think so. That's why he's right.
Yeah, this is not a 15-minute conversation for me.
You want to cover your HR closed session?
Yes, we absolutely can do that. So we are going to go ahead and do our HR closed session.
Madam Chair, I move we go into closed session for the purposes on our agenda, which would include reviewing the HR recommendations. And all the reasons stated in the printed agenda. For all the reasons stated on the printed agenda.
Okay? We have a motion and a second. Are we ready to go in closed session? Please let us say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Sorry.
Yeah, man.
Closed session.
Go in closed session.
I told you that last time I want to.
You go, Lisa.